From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and ahead today with our cattle market segment out of Iowa State University, Lee Schulz. In addition to recapping another favorable week in the cattle markets, he'll look at the current trend in fed cattle forward contracting as a price risk management signal. Then K-State's Jaymelynn Farney will discuss several ideas on managing cow herds when perennial pasture is limited. That'll be the theme of 3 workshops to be held in December, co-sponsored by K-State and the University of Nebraska. And on this week's 4-H segment later on, K-State's Pam van Horn is joined by longtime Kansas 4-H volunteer Ray Bartholomew, who just received the 2017 National Friend of Extension Award. All that here on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Thanks for listening in on this Monday. And for our cattle market observations this week, we turn once again to livestock economist out of Iowa State University, Lee Schulz, who has a collection of things to cover with us today. And we'll start with this cattle market, which clearly now, Lee, is in an upward trajectory. When you look at the cash and the futures from last week, it's a bullish scene, that's for sure.
And it is, as we enter really this seasonal push that we typically see in the market. You know, I think if you're looking at futures versus cash, I think you could say that the futures market is leading a bit just as you look at the basis levels. Last week we came in with cash in that 125 range, closed out the December futures at 127. As we get out into February and April, we're even seeing higher prices. So I think that there is a rather optimistic outlook. Same can be said for the feeder cattle. I think why we've seen such strong backgrounding margins is we're seeing really a steady feeder cattle market and even premiums as we look at that January compared to the November.
And all of this, again, in the wake of healthy supplies, that's for sure, and apparently that demand side is still bolstering these markets sufficiently.
It is. We're looking at very large weekly slaughter. But when you look at cold storage data, you know, that's one indication that supplies are moving relatively well. We're seeing those much lower than a year ago, even with those larger supplies. We are entering the season now of ramp up to Thanksgiving and then the Christmas holiday, and we're starting to see that impacted on the retail side with more features. Those are moving relatively well, even at higher prices than maybe competitive meats because they are still lower than what we've seen the last couple of years.
Well, this friendly overtone in the markets lends to a number of management considerations here when you think about marketing cattle. And, well, for one thing, we've been watching what this all means in regard to those calves. One is still maybe wrestling with the decision of whether to retain, whether to sell at this point. And the prices are giving some support to that retained ownership angle, aren't they?
They are, and also I think there's really, if you look at compared to late August of this year, we've seen a $20 rally in feeder cattle futures, so you're staring at a better situation, even if you're marketing calves now, than you were back in August for those marketings at this time of year. But also the market's offering incentives for backgrounding calves. We're seeing, as I mentioned, that relatively steady and even premium on those feeder cattle futures contracts. And so we're looking at backgrounding margins in the range of $120 per hundredweight all the way up to almost $2 per hundredweight. And that's a value of gain. But when you compare that to cost of gain with feeding cost of gain in that $60 to $70 range, even if you're adding other economic costs on top of that, that maybe would equal about $100 per hundredweight, you're still looking at significant value of gain for keeping those calves on feed.
And that holds true if you consider calves placed into the feedlot for finishing as well. The cattle feeding margins have improved to the point where that's looking to be more of a positive prospect.
And I think that's maybe the biggest surprise, that we've really seen those margins turn positive. If you're looking at placements back from June all the way through November, I'm currently projecting positive feedlot margins. That's assuming a 7-weight steer, but also even on calves placed at 5-weight, we're seeing profitable margins. That very much speaks to the strength we've seen in this live cattle futures trade, that the positive margins do extend beyond what we've seen in 2017 into the first quarter or so of 2018.
Associated with this, Lee, you have put together some thoughts that point to the forward-fed cattle contract commitments and just what those might suggest in as far as price risk management opportunity for producers. You might explain further.
Well, I'm staring at the weekly report. It's LMCT 153, and it gives you the new forward contract signings and basis bids between cattle feeders and beef packers. And if you look at the last report, for example, 11,000 head were contracted for March 2018 delivery, and almost 90% of those were at a premium to the April live cattle futures contract. So that suggests that packers are really after cattle as we look at that spring delivery. And there's quite a bit fewer for that March delivery than compared to February or April. So I think as we get closer to 2018, if that relative hole remains for particularly March, those basis bids are likely to continue to increase. Right now, the highest basis bids on those forward contracts are about $7. But last year, March 2017, basis averaged $8 over the April live cattle futures contract was as high as $12. So I think packers right now are a bit hedging their bets and offering those strong basis levels, just in concern that we could see basis levels like we did last spring. So that is one thing to watch, as I mentioned, as we get closer to 2018. Those basis bids are likely to remain strong or even get stronger, and that could help offset some of the risk as we get to March 2018 delivery.
Cull cows and whether to market them or retain them and put a bit of weight on them for a higher return on their marketing. And you have some information that you put together on that as well. And frankly, this looks like a possible paying proposition, you say, Lee.
It does. And when you look at, I don't think there's any real strong signal to contract or expand herds. If anything, profits have improved. As I mentioned, feeder cattle futures contract, we've seen that $20 rally since late August. And so if maybe waffling, if the cows should stay or go, I think that rally maybe pointed to keeping around another year, especially with those deferred contracts increasing as well. Costs remain relatively low. But also I think there's some important distinction if we've decided to call those cows. This year really is shaping up to be a year that adding weight to those cows may pay off. It didn't pay off 2014 into 2015 or 2015 into 2016. Last year it paid off as we've seen a real rally in cull cow prices. And I think that rally, we could see that again this year with maybe prices kind of hitting their low in December and then increasing from there. That would very much align with what we're seeing in the live cattle futures trade, and those are very correlated markets.
So as a producer puts a pencil to this, Lee, what are some of the key things they need to really focus on before they actually commit to putting those cull cows on feed?
Well, I think it's really understanding when that cow will pay herself off. And so important to that is the cost of production, also the price of calves or the profit I've received so far from those calves, but also future calf prices as well as cull cow prices. Really, research has shown that a female doesn't pay herself off with lifetime production of calves. You need that cull cow revenue. And so that cull cow revenue may be important than an additional calf. And so in years like this where, I may be on the fence if I'm going to cull that cow or not, and we're seeing strong cull cow prices, that may tip the scale to putting some weight on those cows and selling her in a seasonally high market this coming spring and recouping that investment may be worth more than that additional calf.
Lee, one more thing that's coming up later today. The latest beef and cattle trade data will be released by the USDA. This will cover through the month of September. We've been really appreciating how strong that export trade has been for our beef product itself. What are market watchers thinking those numbers will say this time around?
You're exactly right. That's really been key to keeping beef demand and keeping prices really where they're at in the beef complex is that strength in our exports. Now, data is a little bit lagged as we look at export data. We're getting the new September data here today, but August was the largest month for beef exports since July 2013 to really show you how strong those exports are. All the really major export destinations for the U.S. were up. We're seeing exports up for the year 15%. And so that's a really positive undertone that we're seeing in this export trade. So even if we see from a year-over-year standpoint exports wane a bit, we're still in the positive territory. The reason why we could see exports at least start to wane a bit or maybe flatline is we've seen a bit of strength in the value of the dollar. That could have potential impact on those exports. Also realizing, we're comparing to year-ago levels. When exports are large year ago, you could see those start to decrease a little bit. But again, the undertone from beef exports is really driving this market.
And in fact, if those numbers would come in higher than anticipated, wow, that would be quite a boost to the market once more, given what you said just there.
I very much think so. We have this strong undertone from the domestic market. We're entering that holiday season. You put on top of that strength in exports, and I think that will even further help support these prices.
We'll watch for those numbers out later today on U.S. beef trade. And Lee, many thanks for the comments on all of these matters.
All right, thank you.
Lee Schulz is a livestock economist at Iowa State University, and he contributes to our weekly series on the cattle market trends here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now. On this next segment, we'll center our visit on a trio of educational sessions that are being put on in a few weeks now, a collaborative effort of Kansas State University and the University of Nebraska. And it will address cow-calf management with limited perennial pasture availability. Talking with us now, one of the 3 who will be conducting these workshops in December, Jaymelynn Farney, as you know, is a beef systems specialist, K-State Research and Extension, based in southeast Kansas. So, Jaymelynn, what inspired this series of meetings?
Well, Eric, myself and several colleagues from Nebraska are part of a multi-state disciplinary research group that are specifically looking at ways that we can offset some of this changing land usage that we are seeing through the central United States. If you go and look at the most recent land usage report coming from the USDA, overall, the percentage of crop ground, perennial pasture are staying the same, but in certain regions of the country, the central part being one, we are actually losing some of our perennial pasture going towards crop ground. Therefore, cow-calf producers particularly are the ones who are struggling with trying to come up with ways to maintain their current cow numbers to be able to maintain their livelihoods.
Because that's, after all, where the rubber meets the road economically. You have to have a critical mass of numbers there.
You do, and luckily, we have some producers who've already been thinking outside of the box in regards to what can we do to take care of these cattle if we don't have pasture ground. Another thing that we're seeing, unfortunately, is some changeover of current landowners, and people are losing their leases on current pasture ground. So we're having some cow-calf guys are having trouble with grass ground. Plus competition from the stalker side makes it where, some of this good green grass becomes a little too pricey just to run a cow herd on.
So your objective in these sessions is to provide some innovative ideas to address that shortage, basically.
Yes. There's three kind of major topics that we're going to address. One of them is strictly going to a partial confined cow operation. One of my cohorts who's working here and is actually going to be speaking is Dr. Carla Jenkins. She's a cow-calf specialist at the University of Nebraska. She's actually based up in the northwest corner, and she's done quite a bit of research looking at confined cow feeding and use of strictly byproducts to be able to reduce the cost of feeding cows in pens. Some of her products that she's utilized has been beet pulp, and of course distiller's grains, and the residues such as straw or corn stalks to be able to maintain cows on a very low-cost diet.
So it's unconventional, clearly, that approach.
Very unconventional. I know, beet pulp's probably not a handy commodity here in Kansas, but we do have similar type of products that would be a valuable commodity to be able to use to feed our cows in confinement. Some of the research that the Nebraska colleagues have been finding is that one of their cheapest management systems, especially in the sandhills in Nebraska, include confined cow feeding over the summer and grazing of corn residues over the winter.
So the alternate systems that might come from that idea will be fully displayed during one of the presentations. Your other colleague from the University of Nebraska will be looking at economical forage options for this Central Plains area then, right?
That is correct. Mary Drowanowski, she's with the University of Nebraska. She's actually based in Lincoln. She is going to adapt each of her presentations based on the locale, because we do have very significant differences in management practices from our east to west gradient. So specifically, for example, on the eastern side, where our eastern meeting will be, she'll look at some outside-the-box usage of corn stalks. Grazing is really the cheapest way to do it, but we do not, unfortunately, utilize as much of our corn residue grazing in the east side as we have the potential for. But baling it, is it economical to ammoniate corn stalks for cow herds? She's also going to maybe spend a little bit of time talking about what happens if you pull a piece of crop ground out of cash crop production and you convert it into a forage resource for cattle. So some different outside-the-box usage of some corn residues and corn ground. In the central region, she's going to spend some time talking about our milo, how to utilize those in our sedans, sorghums, how to properly feed it. What are some of the new technologies to process some of these forages are things that we look at covering. So she's really branching out, thinking outside the box, what makes sense from a dollars and cents perspective.
There'll be something to take away from that presentation as well. But we do want to dwell a moment on your part of this three-pronged workshop, if you will, and you will be addressing the utilization of cover crops in the cow-calf nutrition program and have had quite some experience here in Kansas, particularly in your area in the southeast of late, looking at those alternatives. And what are you hoping to convey there, Jaymelynn?
I will strictly talk about how to maximally produce calories per acre. So how you can use these cover crops in your cow herd operation, some of the do's and don'ts. What are some plant species that we know are beneficial for both the cattle and have some sustainable ecological benefits as well? And what are some things, not necessarily every cover crop or annual forage is perfectly safe for cattle to consume that we need to make sure we understand about. I'll spend quite a bit of my time talking about how to efficiently use these cover crops. They're a very, very high quality energy and protein source. that many times are offering 3 times the amount of protein as what a dry pregnant cow needs. So, putting a cow on something like that, you could probably make more money putting a stocker calf on there instead of a cow. But we have some management opportunities where you could do some limited grazing, some rotational grazing with some dry dormant forage or hay, that you can be able to use your pasture as your supplement. So instead of hauling out range cubes or putting out protein tubs, you can use a green-grown forage as your protein supplement.
This is, again, in keeping with the rest of the theme of this program, based on some outside-the-box thinking, particularly with respect to management of that forage and the herd itself, right, Jaymelynn?
It is. We're just trying to give cattle producers ideas to be able to maintain their herd inventory. And for some of the younger generation, I'm speaking from personal experience, there's only so many acres of ground available. If we want to be in the cattle business, we need to either develop relationships with our cash crop counterparts or find some ways to be able to do a partial confinement to be able to get into the cattle business, to be able to maintain our operations.
And these are realistic possibilities. They're applicable. That's really the point here. These aren't just extreme systems. They're very workable in most instances.
Yes, everything that we will be presenting has been completed in research or actually on producers' farms. So this is something that we think should, with a few learning curves, everything new has some learning curves, should be able to be applied to any kind of operation.
Now, producers, you'll want to hear the full story on these alternatives, and that will be available to you via one of these 3 sessions coming up in December. Let's quickly run through the lineup there. December the 12th in Marysville, Kansas, at the Helvering Center there. The next day, December the 13th, in Blue Hill, Nebraska, at the Community Center. Finally, December the 14th, back in Kansas at Oberlin in the northwest part of the state at the Gateway Civic Center. These are free programs. You do want a meal count, so you want reservations, do you not, Jaymelynn?
Yes, we do. Please put on your calendar the dates, which event you would like to attend, and we would like RSVPs by December 8th. We do have specific point of contacts for reservations. Due to radio, it is probably difficult to give you all of their contact numbers, but we do have a press release on ksubeef.org. You can find information about this by going to the Southeast Research Extension website. I'll also have links for that and all of your contacts. Just because a meeting is held in Kansas does not mean we only want Kansas producers. We welcome anybody who is interested in these topics to come. Come and learn about what our outside-the-box thinking of ways that we can maintain our cow inventory while we have a shrinking perennial pasture.
Each of these are evening meetings starting with the meal at 6:30. Again, you can find out the details on registering at ksubeef.org, or you can go to the website southeast.ksu.edu. Wishing you the best with these, Jaymelynn. Thank you for the preview.
Oh, thank you, and please attend.
Jaymelynn Farney, Beef Systems Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Now, today's agricultural news headlines in brief for you, courtesy in part of DTN. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue on Friday announced the appointment of a slate of Farm Service Agency and Rural Development state directors, including those for Kansas. Sharon Springs, Kansas farmer David Shem has been appointed to serve as the executive director of the USDA's Farm Service Agency here in Kansas. David was serving as the president of the National Association of Wheat Growers and previously served as the president of the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. And Lynn Heinrichsen was appointed as the USDA Rural Development State Director for Kansas. She was with the Kansas Department of Agriculture in 2013 as the Agribusiness Development Director, and for over a decade prior to joining the KDA, she owned and managed a professional staffing agency. She also raises Angus cattle near Westmoreland in northeast Kansas with her husband, Ron. So again, Lynn Heinrichsen is appointed the USDA Rural Development State Director, and David Shem is the new State Director of the Farm Service Agency here in Kansas. The House Tax Reform Bill is now out for scrutiny. There's already been several areas in the legislation that industries want changed, including in agriculture. The House GOP bill, called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act by title, lowers the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20% and creates a new 25% tax rate for pass-through entities. In return, the bill eliminates or puts tighter limits on an array of business deductions and tax credits. The bill will be debated in the House Ways and Means Committee this week. The Senate Finance Committee will release its own bill soon as well. Republicans on the Senate side praised their House brethren on Thursday, suggesting that the Senate bill likely will not be far off from the House bill. Keiko Isom, an agricultural accounting and consulting firm with roots here in Kansas, applauded aspects of the Republicans' proposed tax overhaul bill while calling for changes because the bill as written, they say, could raise effective tax rates on many farmers and ranchers. Jeff Wald, the CEO of Keiko Isom, said the phase-out of the estate tax will be welcome news for farms and ranchers that could be hit by the tax. The tax bill would double the asset exemption for individuals to $11 million, but would phase out the estate tax after 2023. Wald also applauded Republicans for not limiting farmers' ability to use the cash method of accounting. Cash accounting maintained for any company that does not have gross revenue averaging over $25 million over a 3-year average, that is. The bill increases Section 179, immediate expensing, to $5 million before 2023 for businesses with $20 million or less in overall capital expenses. Still, Wald said there were provisions in the tax bill that would hamper growth for farmers and ranchers and could increase their taxes. The tax plan would cap business interest deductions at 30% of adjustable taxable income. Like cash accounting, businesses with average revenue of $25 million or less would be exempt from that cap. Wald called on Congress to consider 4 changes to the bill: exempt farm businesses from limits on interest deductions. Farms and ranches often finance equipment, land, and input costs with debt financing. Allow farmers and ranchers to use like-kind exchanges for farm equipment. The current tax code allows producers to avoid paying taxes on the trades of equipment provided that the farmer acquires similar equipment. Also saying that Congress should preserve the ability of farmers to use such like-kind exchanges. Exempt agriculture from the elimination of the domestic production activities deduction. That deduction applies to proceeds from agricultural products that are manufactured, produced, or grown by producers. There are special provisions that allow cooperatives to pass the benefit of its deduction directly through to their farmer members, and allow agriculture to carry back losses to offset taxes paid in previous good years. Wald noting that when a farmer experiences a loss during a bad year, they should be able to continue to apply that loss to offset taxes paid in previous good years. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and now it's on to this week's edition of Tree Tales. And awaiting with that, K-State Forester, Bob Atchison. Bob?
For Kansans who enjoy wood heat and a little exercise, cutting firewood in the fall can achieve both goals. As the old saying goes, cut your own firewood and it will warm you twice. There are other reasons for woodland and windbreak owners to consider heating with wood. Cutting your own firewood can save on energy bills, and if you decide to sell it, it can average up to $100 per cord. Firewood harvest has the potential to be an excellent tool for improving forest land health by altering species composition, increasing growth rates, and removing undesirable trees. The first step a woodland owner should take is to identify crop trees that will provide long-term benefits to wildlife, aesthetic values, or timber products. This often includes species like oak and walnut. Selecting trees with straight stems, few defects on the trunks, and healthy crowns is also important. Once crop trees are identified with paint or flagging, firewood harvest can begin. Dead trees are also a good source for firewood and provide excellent wildlife habitat. Leaving 3 to 4 per acre is a good rule of thumb to promote wildlife habitat. Releasing the crowns of crop trees through firewood harvest should be the first priority. If the firewood trees are undesirables like honey locust or Osage orange, herbicide stump treatments should be applied to prevent sprouting. This type of firewood harvest will yield at least 1/2 cord per acre, or more, depending upon the number of crop trees. Regarding heat value of wood, Osage orange is the preferred tree, producing more heat than any other Kansas wood. Osage orange is preferred for covered stoves and not fireplaces, since the wood does have a tendency to spark. Following Osage orange, trees with the best heat value include black locust, hickory, post oak, pecan, honey locust, mulberry, and bur and red oak. The Environmental Quality Incentives Program, known as EQIP, can cover the majority of costs landowners incur improving woodlands through firewood harvest, including the costs of hiring professional forestry contractors to mark trees and carry out crop tree release. For more information, contact the Kansas Forest Service at 785-532-3310 or check us out on the web at www.kansasforest.org. This is Bob Atchison with the Kansas Forest Service, encouraging you to value and manage the woodlands and windbreaks on your land. You've been listening to another Tree Tale.
All right, Bob, many thanks. Next up, this week's Kansas 4-H segment. After this, you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and in this segment, our regular visit about the Kansas 4-H program. Here we're going to hear from K-State Research and Extension 4-H specialist Pam van Horn, along with her special guest, who has just been named the national winner of the Epsilon Sigma Phi Friend of Extension Award. Pam, explain the award, if you would, first of all, and what Epsilon Sigma Phi actually is.
Epsilon Sigma Phi is an extension association when tenured extension agents belong to, both agents and specialists, and each year we honor different people within our ranks, and one of the categories is Friend of Extension, which gives us an opportunity to celebrate and highlight an individual or individuals for their work that they do on behalf of Extension or give back to Extension.
And that friendship could be represented in the way of volunteerism or financial support, a number of things, right?
A number of things. Volunteers, financial support, just anything that really enhances Extension.
Now, we have talked innumerable times right here on this broadcast about the value of volunteers to Kansas 4-H. They are in many ways the lifeblood of the program. They make it tick. And in fact, our honoree is right in that realm, right?
That is so true. Our honoree today, one of our 4-H programs would not even probably have the depth and breadth that it reaches across the state if it wasn't for him.
His name is Ray Bartholomew. He hails from Hutchinson. you, for how many years, have been deeply involved in the 4-H shooting sports activity?
I've been involved at the local level for over 20 years. My son wanted to do shooting sports, and we got to that point where you can't do shooting sports without certified instructors. So I stepped up to the plate and did that, and I guess I haven't graduated because I'm still involved. For the last 11 years, I've been involved as the state volunteer coordinator, responsible for training other adults and older youth to become instructors to help go back to their local programs and be supportive of doing the different disciplines that we offer in shooting sports and 4-H.
What's been the allure of this, Ray, to you?
For me, it's a passion. I get to do something I enjoy doing and pass on that art, those opportunities to work with firearms, to work with archery equipment, but to do it safely. So why I do what I do is really the education piece. There's lots of other avenues where youth can maybe go out and hunt, do those things, but we need to initially learn how to do it safely, learn how to appropriately use the equipment, and enjoy the sport.
Have to ask you, and stepping back a bit here, were you a 4-H'er growing up then?
Yes, I was a 4-H'er.
Where and when?
I was in both Osborne and Rooks County because we lived pretty much on the line, so involved in a club in Osborne County initially and then in Rooks County as I went through the later years in 4-H.
What has been your most memorable activity within your support of 4-H shooting sports?
There's so many. I think the most recent one was having an adult come back, picked up his daughter that was with one of my grandchilds at our house, and we have this kind of aha moment. We know each other from somewhere. Well, he had an older child that was in our air pistol program, and he's like, well, I'm not sure how much my son learned, but I learned a lot because I learned things to help him learn. So those kind of moments are just, they get you to tingle a bit.
Right. We have, in this segment, visited about shooting sports and the skills developed, but it's beyond just the physical ability to operate a firearm. Ray, how do you view that as a volunteer, as a supporter of the program?
There's a piece of this that we're trying to teach kids how to do something appropriately with the equipment that in our culture isn't always used appropriately. And if we can get them early where they understand, and particularly in 4-H, we don't point the gun at people, we don't point at images of people. It's all about learn how to do this in an appropriate manner, shooting paper targets, and then in cases where they want to go learn how to hunt, being able to do that in a safe manner.
It's about discipline and responsibility.
Yes.
In large part.
Yep.
Any idea how many 4-H'ers you've interacted with, helped along the way in those 20-some years?
You know, locally we run through we have between 100 and 150 youth in the local program. But to think about it from a state level, I don't really have a good number. There's between 25 and 3,500 youth on an annual basis that are part of the program. So it kind of trickles down from the fact that we're training adults to go back and train those youth.
And is the program continuing its growth in the state?
We have. In the last probably 4 to 5 years, our average increase is about 3 to 5%.
And you're staying with it for the foreseeable future in terms of state leadership?
Yeah, I have no plans to do anything else relative to that. I would love to get people on board to help create sustainability, so that's why we train adults to learn to do the disciplines and help us in the coordination.
You have invested unending time, effort, resources of your own into this, so the rewards must be there for you. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be doing it.
Yeah, since I have a passion for it, it allows me to do something where it's not my paid job. I get to do what I like to do, and Extension provides that platform for the opportunity.
Lastly, Ray, what does this recognition mean to you? It's a national award now of the Friend of Extension. This must be gratifying.
It is gratifying. It's also humbling because I look at Extension being a family, and since I'm not a paid employee, I look like I'm an adopted child of Extension. And I very much appreciate it.
Pam, you have worked with Ray for many a year on this program, so very deserving.
He is very deserving. As I said earlier, This program would not be where it is today without his dedication and his input to train others. And what he's not telling you is that he is nationally certified in several of the disciplines. And I think 4-H, Kansas 4-H is very blessed to have him.
Ray, congratulations on this. And we appreciate everything you've done for 4-H and continue to do. Thank you for joining us for a few moments right here.
Thank you.
And Pam, thank you as well for bringing Ray by.
Thank you for having us.
Accompanying K-State Research and Extension 4-H Specialist Pam van Horn, the newly named recipient of the National Epsilon Sigma Phi Friend of Extension Award, Ray Bartholomew. That is this week's 4-H segment. Thanks for tuning in, and please rejoin us this same time tomorrow right here, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.